I am Camille, 35 years old, and my own family ignored my wedding, dismissing it as unworthy of their time. But my billionaire in-laws transformed it into the event of the century, leaving everyone wishing they had not stayed away. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Sunday dinners at my mother Vivian's estate in Atlanta always felt less like family gatherings and more like corporate performance reviews. Vivian sat at the head of her massive mahogany dining table, her posture rigid, her pearls perfectly aligned. She poured a glass of sweet iced tea and smiled warmly at my younger sister Jada and her husband Preston. I sat opposite them silently enduring the usual weekly display of favoritism. Preston, a white venture capitalist who wore fleece vests indoors to project an aura of casual wealth, spent the first 30 minutes of dinner boasting about his latest investment acquisitions. Jada, 32 years old and perfectly molded into our mother's image of high society success, nodded along while checking her reflection in her silver spoon. "We are looking at acquiring a massive tech portfolio by Q3, Preston announced, cutting into his steak. "It takes a certain level of aggressive financial maneuvering, but that is why my investors trust me. I do not play small." "That is exactly the kind of ambition this family represents," Vivian said, beaming at her son-in-law. She then turned her sharp gaze toward me, her smile instantly fading into a thin line of disappointment. "Did you hear that, Camille? Aggressive financial maneuvering? Not just sitting behind a desk crunching numbers for someone else's wealth like you do at your little auditing firm." I took a slow breath. I was a senior financial risk analyst. I managed massive portfolios, uncovered corporate fraud, and earned an excellent salary. But to my mother, any job that did not come with a country club membership and a flashy title was a failure. She was obsessed with respectability politics, measuring success entirely by social status and proximity to elite circles. "My firm is doing very well, Mother," I replied calmly, "but I actually brought something special to share tonight." I reached into my bag and pulled out two crisp, understated cream envelopes. Julian and I had spent weeks picking out the perfect design for our wedding invitations. They were elegant, simple, and exactly what we wanted. I slid one envelope across the table toward my mother and the other toward Jada and Preston. "Are you seriously using 50-cent cardstock for a wedding invitation?" Jada laughed. She picked up the envelope, inspecting it as if it were coated in disease. Without waiting for my answer, my sister set the envelope back down on the table and deliberately placed her sweating glass of sweet iced tea squarely on top of it. A dark, wet ring immediately began bleeding through the paper, ruining the gold lettering Julian and I had carefully chosen. I stared at the water stains spreading across the invitation I had proudly brought to share. "Jada, are you really using my wedding invitation as a coaster?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, despite the familiar burn of anger in my chest. Vivian adjusted her napkin and did not even glance at the ruined paper. "Do not start drama, Camille. You know Jada is stressed. Besides, we need to discuss this date you have chosen. It is highly inconvenient." "Inconvenient? Julian and I set this date 8 months ago," I replied. Jada sighed heavily and leaned against her husband. Preston smirked at me over his wine glass, his arrogance suffocating the room. "We are doing our 5-year vow renewal that exact same weekend," Jada announced while studying her manicured nails. "Preston's investors are flying in from New York and we are hosting it in the Hamptons. We absolutely cannot have a schedule conflict." I looked from Jada to my mother, waiting for the punchline. "You are scheduling a vow renewal on the exact weekend of my actual wedding, a date you have known about for nearly a year." Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Let us be realistic, Camille. Jada and Preston are hosting an elite networking event disguised as a renewal. Preston needs to impress his board members and secure capital. Your little courthouse meetup with Julian can happen any time." "It is not a meetup," I said, gripping my hands tightly in my lap. "We rented a beautiful botanical garden. We are keeping it intimate because we are paying for it ourselves." Preston laughed out loud and took a long sip of his wine. "Paying for it yourselves on a public school teacher's salary." What is Julian serving at the reception cafeteria? Pizza and chocolate milk? You cannot expect us to drag my high net worth colleagues to a budget wedding in a public garden. It is bad for my brand. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste copper. Julian, the man I loved, worked as a high school history teacher. Or so my family believed. They despised him for his modest salary, constantly mocking his profession and measuring his worth by his bank account. They had no idea that Julian was completely unbothered by their insults, mostly because he had absolutely nothing to prove to people living on credit cards and borrowed status. If you had just listened to me, Vivian sighed, looking at me with pure disdain. I introduced you to perfectly acceptable men, surgeons, corporate lawyers, men from good respectable families who belong to our country club. But no, you insisted on dating a public school employee with no ambition. Now look at you having a pity wedding while your sister hosts the social event of the season. I looked at Jada, the golden child who had never worked a single day in her adult life. She was perfectly molded into our mother's image of success, completely dependent on her husband's volatile income. Then I looked at Preston, who used his supposed wealth to belittle me at every opportunity. I am not changing my wedding date, I said firmly. I am getting married on the 24th. Vivian's fork clattered loudly against her expensive china plate. Yes, you are. In fact, you are going to cancel it entirely. Excuse me. You heard me? Vivian said, her tone dropping into that icy, authoritative register she used whenever someone dared to defy her carefully constructed reality. Jada's vow renewal is going to be massive. She needs a coordinator. She can trust someone to handle the caterers and the florists behind the scenes so she can mingle with the guests. You are going to step up and help your sister. It is what family does. You want me to cancel my own wedding so I can serve as Jada's unpaid event planner? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. Preston leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. Look at it as an opportunity, Camille. You can take that $15,000 you scrounged up for your little garden party and contribute it to our champagne tower. Consider it an investment in our family's brand. When my firm lands this next round of funding from these Hamptons investors, I might even let Julian tutor my kids someday. We can pay him a little extra on the side. The sheer audacity of his request left me momentarily breathless. They did not just want to overshadow my wedding. They wanted to consume it, cannibalize my hard-earned savings, and force me to serve them while they paraded their fake wealth in front of investors. They expected me to literally hand over my wedding fund to pay for Jada's alcohol. No, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Vivian narrowed her eyes, her face hardening into a mask of pure fury. Do not test me, Camille. You are already an embarrassment to this family with your mediocre choices. Do not make yourself an enemy, too. I reached across the table, grabbed my ruined, water-stained invitation from underneath Jada's glass, and stood up. I am getting married on the 24th. You are all invited to attend, but I am not giving you a single dime, Preston, and I am certainly not coordinating your party, Jada. I turned and walked toward the foyer, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Camille, get back here right now! Vivian shouted from the dining room, her chair scraping loudly as she stood up. If you walk out that door, do not expect us to show up to your little garden party. You will be completely on your own. I did not stop. I opened the heavy oak front door and walked out into the warm Atlanta evening, the sound of my mother's demands fading behind me as I walked to my car. I reached my car in the driveway, my hand gripping the cold metal of the door handle, when a sudden realization stopped me. I had left the ruined invitation sitting on the dining table. I refused to let Jada keep it as a trophy of her disrespect. I turned around, marched back up the front steps, and pushed the heavy oak door open. I strode directly into the dining room, snatched the water-stained cardstock from the mahogany table, and turned to leave. But Vivian was waiting. She stepped into my path, her eyes flashing with a dangerous mix of panic and rage. She grabbed my wrist, her manicured nails digging sharply into my skin, and pulled me forcefully into the adjacent kitchen, out of sight of the dining room windows. What do you think you are doing? Vivian hissed, backing me against the cool marble of the kitchen island. You do not walk away from me when I am speaking to you. You are acting like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum over a meaningless date. I pulled my arm free from her grasp, refusing to shrink under her glare. It is not a meaningless date, Mother. It is my wedding day, and I am not canceling it so you can play pretend with Preston's wealthy friends in the Hamptons. Vivian scoffed, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. If you had married the men I introduced you to, you would not be begging for attention right now. Dr. Henderson was ready to buy you a house in Buckhead. Richard owned a chain of car dealerships. They were respectable men from families who matter. I paid for your etiquette classes, your wardrobe, your entire upbringing, so you could land a CEO, not audit their financial books. I invested in you, and you gave me a public school teacher. You did not invest in me. I shot back the years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. I had a full academic scholarship to college while you paid for Jada to fail out of 3 different private universities. You invested in her. I built my career entirely on my own. And Julian is a good man. He works hard, he respects me, and we are building an honest life together. I do not care about country club memberships or what your friends think. Well, you should care about what I think, Vivian snapped, stepping closer until she was inches from my face. Jada is hosting an event that could elevate this entire family. Preston is on the verge of a massive financial breakthrough. This vow renewal needs to be flawless and it requires resources. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to cancel your little garden party. You are going to take the $15,000 you saved for that joke of a wedding and you are going to transfer it to my account by tomorrow morning. We need it to fund Jada's champagne tower and the floral arrangements for the VIP tent. I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer magnitude of her greed. You want me to hand over my wedding savings so Jada can buy liquor for strangers? I want you to finally be useful to this family, Vivian replied without missing a beat. You have always been so selfish with your money, hoarding your analyst salary while your sister has real expenses. This is your chance to contribute. Hand over the $15,000 act as Jada's coordinator, and maybe we will overlook the disrespect you showed at the dinner table tonight. If you refuse, no one in this family will attend your little courthouse meetup. I will make sure of it. The kitchen doors swung open before I could respond. Preston sauntered in, swirling a fresh glass of red wine. His face was flushed, his arrogance radiating off him in waves. He leaned against the stainless steel refrigerator, looking immensely pleased with himself. Listen to your mother, Camille, Preston said, taking a slow sip of his wine. You are making a massive mistake crossing my network. You think you are so secure in your little auditing job, right? You think managing risk portfolios makes you powerful? But you forget how the real world operates. My investors are billionaires. They own the real estate your firm leases. They fund the banks that pay your salary. I know exactly how the real world operates, I said, turning my focus to him. Which is why I know borrowing money to host a fake vow renewal is a pathetic display of insecurity. Preston's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darkening. He pointed a finger at me, his voice dropping its playful tone. Do not push me. I play golf with the senior partners at your firm. I sit on charity boards with your executives. One phone call from me, one casual mention that you are a difficult, uncooperative liability, and your rising career is over. I own the people you work for. You will hand over that money, you will cancel your joke of a wedding, and you will fall in line. The kitchen fell dead silent. Vivian watched me, waiting for the threat to take effect, waiting for the familiar submission she had demanded from me since childhood. They genuinely believed I would fold. They believed my entire existence was dependent on their permission to succeed, that without their validation, I was nothing. I looked down at the ruined, water-stained invitation in my hand. I smoothed out the creased edge, taking a long, slow breath. Then I looked my mother dead in the eye. You have spent my entire life treating me like a bank account and an afterthought. I said, my voice ringing clear and steady against the marble walls. You praise Jada for doing absolutely nothing, while you punish me for building everything I have. I am not canceling my wedding. I am not giving you a single penny of my hard-earned money. And Preston, if you think you can threaten my career with a golf course conversation, you are more foolish than you look. Vivian's mouth dropped open in shock. Preston stepped forward, his face turning an angry shade of red, but I did not give him a chance to speak. Enjoy your fake party in the Hamptons, I said, because my actual wedding is moving forward exactly as planned. I turned my back on both of them, pushing through the swinging kitchen doors. Jada was standing in the hallway eavesdropping, but I did not even glance in her direction. I marched straight to the front door, pulled it open, and walked out into the humid night air. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me, the loud slam echoing across the manicured lawn. I reached my car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. My hands were finally shaking, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had done it. I had finally drawn the line. I put the keys in the ignition, ready to drive away and leave their toxicity behind forever. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my purse. Then it vibrated again and again. A continuous, rapid-fire string of notifications lit up the dark interior of my car. I pulled the phone out and opened the screen. It was the family group chat, a massive thread including every aunt, uncle, and cousin we had. A new message from Vivian sat at the very bottom, bold and undeniable. Family, it is with great sadness that I must announce Camille has chosen to turn her back on us. She has behaved abhorrently toward her sister and Preston. Therefore, no one in this family is permitted to attend her wedding. Anyone who shows up to support her will be cut off completely. We will all be attending Jada's vow renewal instead. I sat in the dark car staring at the glowing screen as the first responses began rolling in, sealing my complete isolation. My phone screen lit up the dark interior of my car, casting a harsh blue glow across the steering wheel. The notification was from the family group chat titled The Addams Legacy. My mother had just dropped her mandate, and I watched in real time as the responses rolled in. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Family, it is with great sadness that I must announce Camille has chosen to turn her back on us. She has behaved abhorrently toward her sister and Preston. Therefore, no one in this family is permitted to attend her wedding. Anyone who shows up to support her will be cut off completely. We will all be attending Jada's vow renewal instead. I typed a response, my fingers shaking with fury. I did not turn my back on anyone. Jada booked her vow renewal on my wedding date, and Preston demanded my savings to pay for it. Before anyone could process my message, Vivian fired back. Do not lie, Camille. You are embarrassing yourself. Preston offered you a chance to be part of a high society event and you threw a tantrum because you are jealous. Aunt Denise, I need your RSVP for the Hamptons house by tonight. Aunt Denise replied immediately. She said she was so sorry for the drama, but since Vivian had already booked her a first-class ticket to New York, she could not turn down a free vacation. My cousin Marcus chimed in next. He typed that Preston was reviewing his business loan application next week, so he had to show face at the renewal to secure his funding. He told me to just change my date and stop being difficult. One by one, aunts, uncles, and cousins folded. They traded my wedding day for free flights, networking opportunities, and the absolute fear of my mother's social wrath. No one defended me. No one pointed out the cruelty of hijacking my date. They just typed their apologies and fell in line behind Vivian. Then came the direct message from Jada. It popped up at the top of my screen, a separate notification meant just for me. Do not be bitter, Camille. Some people are just meant to be in the background. It is not our fault Preston and I have a brand to uphold. You can still transfer the $15,000 to Mom by tomorrow. Consider it your wedding gift to us. If you do not, you are dead to me. I threw my phone onto the passenger seat, put the car in drive, and pulled away from my mother's manicured neighborhood. I drove through the Atlanta traffic on autopilot, navigating the glowing city streets until I reached the modest parking lot of my apartment complex. I turned off the ignition, and the sudden silence of the car felt suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel, resting my forehead against the cold leather. The tears came hot and fast, betraying the stoic face I had held in my mother's dining room. I wept with the exhaustion of someone who had spent a lifetime trying to prove her worth to people committed to misunderstanding her. For 35 years, I had played by the rules. I paid my own way through college. I built a career as a financial auditor without a single introduction from my mother's country club friends. I stayed out of trouble, minded my business, and supported my family whenever they demanded it. And my reward was being told to cancel my own wedding so my sister could buy more champagne. A sharp, sudden tap on the glass made me jump. I looked up through the tear-blurred window. Julian was standing outside my car. He was wearing his usual worn denim jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, looking exactly like the public high school history teacher my mother so deeply despised. He held a plastic bag with takeout containers, his signature easygoing smile firmly in place. I unlocked the doors. Julian slid into the passenger seat, setting the food on the dashboard. He took one look at my face, and his smile vanished instantly. He reached across the console, his large hands gently framing my face. "What did she do?" he asked, his voice low and demanding an immediate answer. I shook my head, struggling to catch my breath. "I do not have a family anymore, Julian. None of them are coming. My mother banned the entire extended family from attending our wedding." Julian did not flinch. He just held my gaze. "Tell me exactly what happened in that house, Camille." Every word. I slid the invitation across the table and Jada used it as a coaster for her iced tea. I said, the humiliation burning my throat all over again. Then my mother told me our wedding date was inconvenient because Jada and Preston decided to host a 5-year vow renewal on the exact same weekend in the Hamptons. They want to impress Preston's white investors. Julian's jaw tightened, but he remained perfectly still. "And what did Preston say?" "He laughed at us." I sobbed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He said you were just a broke public school teacher. He asked if we were serving cafeteria pizza at our reception. He told me I was making a massive mistake crossing his network because he golfs with the senior partners at my auditing firm. He threatened to call my bosses and have me fired if I did not fall in line." Julian wiped a tear from my jawline. "Did your mother defend you?" "My mother cornered me in the kitchen," I said, looking down at my hands. "She told me I was having a pity wedding because I refused to marry the country club millionaires she picked out for me. She demanded that I cancel our wedding entirely. She told me to hand over the $15,000 I saved for our ceremony to pay for Jada's champagne tower. She said I had to act as Jada's unpaid event coordinator, or she would make sure I was completely isolated." I looked back up at Julian, my chest aching with the burden of my family's toxic classism. "They think you are a joke, Julian. They are punishing me because you do not fit their status-obsessed standards. I am so sorry. I am so sorry they look at you and see someone who is not good enough. You are the best man I know, and they treat you like dirt because of your salary." I waited for him to look hurt. I expected him to feel humiliated by my family's vicious insults. I fully expected him to comfort me and say that we did not need their approval, that our love was enough. Julian did none of those things. He let out a short, sharp exhale. He leaned back against the passenger seat headrest, and the warmth completely drained from his eyes. His posture shifted entirely. The humble, easygoing teacher I had known and loved for 2 years vanished in the space of a single heartbeat, replaced by a man radiating an intense, freezing authority that I had never seen before. Julian reached into the inside pocket of his denim jacket. He pulled out a sleek minimalist leather wallet, opened it, and extracted a heavy, solid metal card. He tossed it casually, letting it land directly in my lap. I looked down. It was an American Express Centurion card. An invite-only solid black card reserved exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. And right there, stamped in stark silver lettering across the metal surface, was the name Julian Sterling. I stared at the heavy black card, my mind entirely blank. I looked back up at him, my mouth slightly open, completely unable to process what I was holding. Julian reached out and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. His voice was dangerously calm, carrying the weight of a man who owned the world, but simply chose not to brag about it. "If they want to play the status game, my love, let us show them what real power looks like. Pack a bag. We are going to meet my parents." The drive out of Atlanta felt entirely surreal. I sat in the passenger seat of Julian's sensible sedan, the heavy metal Centurion card still burning a hole in my palm. For 2 years, I had loved a high school history teacher who graded papers at my kitchen island and split the bill on date nights. Now, as we merged onto the highway heading north, the man beside me felt entirely different. I traced the raised lettering on the black card. "Julian Sterling. I am a senior financial auditor. I know exactly what it takes to possess one of these. You do not just apply for it. You have to be invited, and that invitation only comes after you spend and pay off millions of dollars in a single year. You told me your parents were retired postal workers, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the engine. Julian kept his eyes on the road. I told you they worked in logistics and delivery, which is technically true. Sterling Holdings handles global supply chain logistics, commercial real estate, and tech infrastructure. Sterling Holdings. The name hit me like a physical blow. I audited corporate monoliths for a living. I knew that name. They were a quiet, ruthless conglomerate that owned half the commercial property in the state. You are the sole heir to a $4 billion dynasty, I said, piecing the puzzle together. And you let my mother and brother-in-law mock your public school salary for 2 years. You let Preston offer to pay you to tutor his future children. Julian glanced at me, his expression softening just a fraction. I let them show me exactly who they were. I grew up surrounded by people who only saw my last name. Women who wanted the estate, friends who wanted the network, investors who wanted the capital. When I met you, you were completely unimpressed by status. You were brilliant, self-made, and you loved a public school teacher for exactly who he was. I wanted to keep that safe for as long as possible. He reached over and took my hand. But your family crossed a line tonight. I will not let them humiliate my future wife. It is time you met my real family. 2 hours later, we turned off a quiet county road and approached a set of massive wrought iron gates. There were no flashy signs, just a discreet security outpost manned by 2 armed guards in tailored black suits. One of them stepped forward, saw Julian behind the wheel, and immediately signaled for the gates to open. The driveway was a winding, pristine path through ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. We drove for 10 solid minutes before the house even came into view. It was a staggering stone manor sitting on a 500-acre private estate. It did not scream for attention like my mother's country club home. It simply existed with absolute, immovable power. Julian parked the car and led me up the wide stone steps. Before he could even reach for the handle, the double doors swung open. Standing in the grand foyer were Lawrence and Josephine Sterling. They were nothing like the loud, flashy socialites my mother worshipped. Lawrence wore a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, projecting a quiet authority that instantly commanded respect. Josephine was impeccably elegant, her hair styled perfectly, her gaze sharp and assessing. Julian kissed his mother's cheek and shook his father's hand. "Mom, Dad, this is Camille." Josephine stepped forward and took both of my hands in hers. Her grasp was warm, but her eyes scanned my face with the precision of a hawk. "Welcome home, Camille. We have waited a long time to finally meet the woman who captured our son's heart." Lawrence offered a warm, deep laugh. "Do not let her intimidate you. She has been planning this wedding in her head since Julian bought the ring. Come into the parlor. You look like you need a drink." They led us into a breathtaking room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive stone fireplace. Josephine moved to a crystal decanter and poured 2 glasses of deep red wine. As a risk analyst, I had a good eye for assets. The bottle she poured from easily cost $10,000. She handed me a glass and sat opposite me on a plush velvet sofa. "So," Josephine said, crossing her legs, "Julian tells me you had a family dinner tonight to discuss the wedding plans. How did it go?" I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted like velvet and smoke. I looked at Julian. He gave me a slight nod, encouraging me to tell the truth. For 35 years, I had protected my mother's reputation. I had hidden the emotional abuse, swallowed the insults, and played the role of the dutiful, quiet daughter so she could shine. But she had banned my entire family from my wedding. She had chosen a fake vow renewal over my actual marriage. I was done protecting her. I reached into my bag and pulled out my meticulously organized wedding budget spreadsheet along with the water-stained invitation. I set them on the mahogany coffee table between us. "It went poorly, Mrs. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My mother and my sister have decided that my wedding is an inconvenience. They booked a 5-year vow renewal on the exact same weekend to entertain my brother-in-law's venture capital investors. My mother demanded that I cancel this wedding entirely, to act as their unpaid event coordinator." Josephine's warm smile vanished. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lawrence stopped swirling his wine glass and leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. I continued refusing to let my voice shake. When I declined to cancel my wedding, my mother demanded I transfer my $15,000 wedding savings to her account to pay for my sister's champagne tower. When I refused again, she went to our family group chat and officially banned every aunt, uncle, and cousin from attending my ceremony. They have all RSVP'd to my sister's party. We currently have 0 guests on my side of the aisle. I pointed to the ruined invitation on the table. My sister used that as a coaster for her iced tea. She said it was budget cardstock. Silence stretched across the parlor. It was not a pitying silence. It was the dangerous, heavy silence that precedes a hurricane. Josephine Sterling slowly set her wine glass down on the table. She picked up my ruined wedding invitation, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the water stain over Julian's name. She looked at Lawrence, communicating an entire battle plan in a single glance. Then she picked up my heavily highlighted, strictly calculated budget spreadsheet. I had spent weeks balancing every dollar to ensure we could afford a beautiful, modest garden ceremony without going into debt. Josephine looked at me, her eyes narrowing into dangerous, calculated slits. She gripped the top of the spreadsheet and slowly, deliberately tore it perfectly in half. She placed the torn pieces back on the table. "No daughter of mine will be treated like an afterthought," Josephine said, her voice laced with absolute terrifying authority. "We are not doing a modest garden ceremony, Camille. If your mother wants to play games with social status, she is about to learn she is entirely out of her league. We are taking over." The sound of the tearing paper seemed to echo in the cavernous, stone-lined parlor. I stared at the two halves of my meticulous spreadsheet, the document I had agonized over for months now resting in the crystal wastebasket. Josephine did not just destroy my budget. She obliterated the very concept of limits. Before I could even process the magnitude of her statement, Josephine had her phone pressed to her ear. She began pacing the length of the antique Persian rug, her voice a sharp, commanding whip that left absolutely no room for argument. Within seconds, the quiet, luxurious parlor transformed into an active military command center. Household staff appeared like ghosts from the hallways, moving with practiced efficiency. They cleared the center of the massive mahogany dining table in the adjacent room, setting up sleek laptops, silver trays of espresso, and thick leather-bound notepads. Julian wrapped a strong, reassuring arm around my waist, pulling me firmly against his side. He leaned down, his voice a low, steady rumble near my ear. "I told you, Camille. You are a Sterling now. We do not do modest when our family has been insulted. We do not negotiate with terrorists, and we certainly do not let small-minded social climbers dictate our happiness." I sat back down on the plush velvet sofa, my head spinning with a wild, intoxicating mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. I took another slow sip of the $10,000 wine. It tasted like absolute vindication. The heavy oak double doors of the parlor suddenly swung open. A security guard in a sharp black suit stepped aside, ushering a frantic figure into the room. It was my best friend Keisha. She was wearing her silk pajamas tucked hastily into a pair of designer sweatpants, an oversized coat thrown over her shoulders. Julian had texted her the coordinates while we were driving up the private highway, and she had clearly broken several speed limits to get here. Keisha stopped dead in her tracks in the center of the room. Her eyes darted wildly, taking in the towering bookshelves, the roaring stone fireplace, the priceless Renaissance art hanging on the walls, and the sheer, immovable wealth radiating from every corner of the estate. "Julian texted me that you had been kidnapped by a secret billionaire," Keisha announced, her voice echoing loudly in the grand space. She marched straight up to Julian, pointing an accusing finger directly at his chest. "You grade high school history essays at my kitchen table. You drive a sensible Honda sedan. You complain about the price of printer ink. What exactly is this?" Julian offered a calm, unapologetic smile, handing her a freshly poured glass of the vintage red wine. "I prefer to keep a low profile, Keisha. The world treats you very differently when they know your last name is Sterling." Keisha took a massive gulp of the wine. Her eyes widened at the taste, clearly recognizing the astronomical quality. Then she turned, rushed over to the sofa, and pulled me into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. I had texted her from my car earlier about the disastrous dinner, about Jada using my invitation as a coaster, and about my mother's ultimate unforgivable betrayal. She pulled back, gripping my shoulders tightly. I was fully prepared to drive to your mother's house and set the manicured lawn on fire, Keisha declared fiercely. But this, she gestured wildly around the room. This is so much better. They wanted to play a petty game of exclusion, and you accidentally brought the nuclear codes. The deep, rhythmic thumping of heavy helicopter blades chopping through the night air suddenly vibrated against the parlor windows. I stood up and looked outside. A sleek matte black helicopter was touching down on the illuminated helipad located at the far edge of the sprawling estate lawns. My team is here, Josephine announced, turning away from the window and striding back into the center of the room. 3 impeccably dressed professionals walked through the doors moments later. They carried sleek leather portfolios and digital tablets, looking entirely awake and ready for battle despite the late hour. These were not the kind of event planners who organized local country club weddings. These were the architects who orchestrated royal galas, international summits, and elite private island retreats. Josephine did not bother with pleasantries. We have exactly 3 weeks to completely overhaul a wedding, she commanded, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who shaped reality to her will. The original plans have been entirely scrapped. We are upgrading. We need a demonstration of absolute, undeniable power. The lead planner, a sharp-looking woman wearing a tailored pantsuit, nodded without missing a single beat. What scale and location are we discussing, Mrs. Sterling? Josephine began pacing again, ticking off items on her fingers. We need a private island. Look into securing an entire atoll in the Maldives, or perhaps renting out a historic fortress on the Amalfi Coast. I want a fleet of chartered G650 private jets standing by at the regional airport to transport the guests in absolute luxury. We will need a culinary master for the catering. Contact Massimo Bottura's team in Italy and see if he is available to fly out. If he claims he is booked, double his standard rate. And call the creative director at Vera Wang immediately. Camille needs a custom gown fitted by next week. I nearly choked on my breath, the sheer magnitude of the numbers flashing through my risk analyst brain. Mrs. Sterling, I gasped, stepping forward. You do not have to do all of this. The gesture is incredible, but my guest list is currently completely empty. My mother banned everyone. They all folded. They chose Jada's Hamptons party over me. Josephine stopped pacing. She walked over to me, placing her cool, steady hands on my cheeks. She looked at me with a gaze so fiercely protective, it made my chest ache with an emotion I had never felt from my own mother. Camille listened to me very carefully. Josephine said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. Your mother banned a group of people who only value status, money, and proximity to power. They chose Preston because they believe he holds the keys to their little social climbing kingdom. So we are going to give them an event that makes Preston's network look like a child's lemonade stand. She turned back to the planners. We will send out new hand-delivered invitations encased in velvet boxes tomorrow morning. When your status-obsessed aunts, uncles, and cousins realize they are turning down a fully paid, ultra-luxury vacation on a private island, they will abandon your sister's Little Hamptons party in a heartbeat. They will trip over themselves begging for a seat on those jets. We are going to bleed your mother's guest list completely dry. Keisha let out a loud, triumphant laugh, raising her wine glass in the air. Oh, this is going to be the greatest social execution in the history of Atlanta. While Josephine was orchestrating the absolute social annihilation of my mother and sister, Lawrence Sterling had remained entirely silent. He sat in a high-backed leather armchair near the roaring fire, the warm orange light reflecting off the screen of his digital tablet. He had not said a single word since Julian and I first arrived and explained the situation. He just sat there listening, processing the information with the cold, calculating mind of a man who owned a global corporate empire. He finally set his empty wine glass down on the marble side table. The soft, sharp clink of the crystal drew everyone's attention. Camille Lawrence said, his voice deep, resonant, and cutting cleanly through the frantic planning chatter of the room. I looked at him, suddenly deeply intimidated by the sheer gravity of his presence. Yes, Mr. Sterling, please call me Lawrence. He adjusted his reading glasses, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of his tablet. You mentioned earlier that your sister's husband was boasting about his venture capital firm. You said he mocked Julian's profession. You said he explicitly threatened your position at your auditing firm. Yes, I nodded, remembering the suffocating arrogance radiating from Preston as he leaned against my mother's refrigerator. He said his investors owned the commercial real estate my firm leases. He said he golfs with the senior partners. He told me I was making a massive mistake crossing his network because he could end my career with one phone call. Lawrence's face remained entirely devoid of emotion. He did not look angry. He did not look outraged. He looked like an apex predator evaluating a very small, very loud mouse. What is the exact name of his venture capital firm? Lawrence asked, his tone deceptively mild. Apex Vanguard Capital, I replied immediately. The name was permanently burned into my brain from the countless times Preston had loudly dropped it at Sunday dinners, demanding everyone acknowledge his perceived brilliance. He is a senior managing partner there. Lawrence nodded slowly, digesting the information. He typed the name into his tablet, the screen illuminating his sharp jawline. The entire parlor had grown completely quiet. Even Josephine paused her rapid-fire instructions, with the event planners turning to watch her husband work. Julian stood close beside me, his hand resting reassuringly on the small of my back. He knew exactly what his father was doing. This was the difference between a social strike and a tactical corporate strike. A slow, ruthless smile spread across Lawrence's face. It was a smile that had undoubtedly terrified corporate boards, dismantled rival conglomerates, and bankrupted arrogant executives for decades. Preston Lawrence chuckled, turning the screen around so we could all see the highly classified, detailed financial dossier displayed there. The boy who insulted my son's salary. His firm is defaulting on a $40 million loan alone my holding company currently owns. I stared at the glowing screen of Lawrence's tablet, the financial charts and default notices painting a picture of absolute ruin for my arrogant brother-in-law. Preston was not a financial titan. He was a man drowning in corporate debt, wearing fleece vests, and drinking expensive wine, while his venture capital firm teetered on the edge of collapse. And Lawrence Sterling owned the cliff he was about to fall off. Julian rested his chin on the top of my head, looking at the tablet with clinical detachment. Do we call in the loan, Dad? Not yet, Lawrence said, turning off the screen and setting the tablet face down on the marble table. A sudden bankruptcy would give him an excuse to cancel their little Hamptons party. We want them to host it. We want them to stand in their empty VIP tents surrounded by the consequences of their actions, while the entire city attends your wedding instead. Let them drain their last remaining dollars on a party no one will attend. Josephine smiled, a sharp, brilliant expression of pure strategic genius. Exactly. Now, Camille, my dear, we have a guest list to compile. 6 weeks passed in a blur of surreal, high-altitude planning. While I continued my daily work as a senior risk analyst, completely unfazed by the murmurs of my family, my weekends were spent at the Sterling estate. I sat in the parlor while Josephine directed a global syndicate of event architects. She did not just book an island. She secured a private, heavily fortified peninsula in the Mediterranean, chartering a fleet of luxury jets to transport the guests from Atlanta directly to the venue. Back in my regular reality, the family group chat was a continuous stream of toxic noise. Jada and Vivian had launched an aggressive, relentless social media campaign masquerading as wedding excitement. Jada posted daily countdowns to her Hamptons vow renewal using hashtags like Family First and Elite Events. She posted pictures of herself doing cake tastings and selecting linens, always making sure to include passive-aggressive captions. So blessed to have a family that shows up for each other, Jada wrote under a picture of her holding a glass of champagne. Some people are just meant to be in the background, but real queens know how to host. Vivian was just as ruthless. She commented on every post, tagging her wealthy country club friends and reinforcing my isolation. I am so proud of my successful daughter and my brilliant son-in-law, Vivian wrote. Loyalty is everything. Those who cannot support our brand do not deserve a seat at our table. My phone constantly buzzed with texts from cousins and aunts urging me to just apologize and hand over the money so I would not have to spend my wedding day alone. I read their messages, deleted them, and went back to approving the custom menu designed by a Michelin-starred chef from Rome. I did not respond. I did not defend myself. I let them build their house of cards as high as they wanted, knowing exactly who controlled the wind. Across Atlanta, Josephine's masterstroke finally deployed. It was a Tuesday morning when the unmarked armored black vehicles began rolling into the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. These were not postal workers or standard delivery drivers. They were private security professionals wearing tailored suits and earpieces. They carried thick, heavy boxes wrapped in midnight blue velvet, and they delivered them directly into the hands of Atlanta's absolute elite. The invitations bypassed the mailrooms and assistants. They were handed directly to the mayor, to the tech billionaires who funded the city's infrastructure, to the real estate moguls, and to the high society matriarchs who dictated the social hierarchy of the entire state. When these titans of industry and society opened the heavy velvet boxes, they did not find standard cardstock. They found solid gold plates, flawlessly engraved with elegant sweeping script. The sheer weight of the metal was a physical manifestation of the Sterling family's limitless power. The invitation detailed a fully paid, ultra-luxury weekend on a private Mediterranean peninsula, complete with chartered flights, five-star accommodations, and an exclusive guest list that read like a global summit of wealth and influence. It was the undeniable event of the decade, and the date printed on the gold plate matched Jada's vow renewal perfectly. At the Piedmont Country Club, entirely unaware of the golden boxes making their way through the city, Vivian sat holding court at her usual corner table. She wore a pristine white tennis skirt and a silk visor, sipping a mimosa, while three of her closest friends nodded along to her boasting. "Preston is closing another massive funding round next week," Vivian announced loudly, ensuring the neighboring tables could hear. "He is simply unstoppable. His venture capital firm is dominating the market. We are expecting 2 state senators and the CEO of Horizon Tech at Jada's vow renewal in the Hamptons. It is going to be an incredibly exclusive gathering. I am so glad we trimmed the fat from our family tree so we can focus on the people who truly matter." Before her friends could offer their usual sycophantic praise, Margaret Kensington walked into the dining room. Margaret was the undisputed queen of Atlanta's old money society. Her family had founded the country club, and her approval was the singular currency Vivian had spent 20 years desperately trying to earn. Vivian immediately sat up straighter, adjusting her posture and flashing a brilliant manufactured smile as Margaret approached their table. "Margaret, darling," Vivian called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I was just telling the ladies about the final menu for the Hamptons. I know you and Charles are flying up on Thursday. Have you decided if you want the imported caviar or the wagyu for the rehearsal dinner?" Margaret stopped at the edge of the table. She looked down at Vivian with an expression of polite, devastating pity. She was holding her expensive leather handbag tightly against her side. "Vivian, that is actually why I came over," Margaret said, her tone carrying effortlessly across the quiet dining room. "I am so incredibly sorry for the late notice, but Charles and I are going to have to cancel our RSVP to Jada's little party. We will not be in the Hamptons next weekend." Vivian's smile faltered, freezing in place. "Cancel, but Margaret, the event is heavily centered around Preston's network. Charles specifically said he wanted to discuss property investments with Preston." "Yes, well, plans change," Margaret replied smoothly, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. "And to be completely honest, Vivian, I think you are going to receive quite a few cancellations by this afternoon. In fact, I know the mayor and the entire board of Horizon Tech are also pulling out of your event." Vivian stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The mimosa sloshed over the rim of her glass, staining the white tablecloth. "What are you talking about, pulling out? Why would everyone cancel on Preston?" Margaret reached into her leather handbag. "Because we received an invitation that absolutely no one in this hemisphere can afford to decline. It is an extraordinary honor, Vivian. A private Mediterranean peninsula, chartered jets. It is the most breathtaking invitation I have ever seen in my 70 years of life." Margaret pulled a thick midnight blue velvet box from her bag and opened it. She gently lifted the solid gold plate, placing it squarely on the table in front of Vivian. The heavy metal caught the morning sunlight gleaming brightly against the spilled mimosa. You see, Margaret explained, completely oblivious to the impending explosion, the Sterling family is finally hosting a wedding. They are notoriously private, but when Lawrence and Josephine Sterling call, the entire world answers. We simply cannot miss it. Vivian stared at the heavy gold plate. Her eyes tracked the elegant sweeping engraving. She read the host line, her lips moving silently as she sounded out the names. Lawrence and Josephine Sterling request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Julian Sterling. Vivian's eyes slowly moved down to the next line. She read the name of the bride. To Ms. Camille Adams. The color completely drained from Vivian's face. She stood frozen, staring at the solid gold plate bearing the name of the daughter she had just banished, marrying into a family that possessed more wealth and power than Vivian could even comprehend. Her perfectly constructed reality shattered in an instant. Vivian's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the cold, impeccably engraved surface of the solid gold plate resting on the white linen tablecloth. The elegant, sweeping script stared back at her, mocking her carefully constructed reality. Camille Adams. Her daughter. The daughter she had ruthlessly banished just 6 weeks ago, the one she had ordered to step aside and fund Jada's vow renewal. This is a joke. Vivian sputtered, a forced, shrill laugh escaping her tightening throat. She looked up at Margaret Kensington, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate denial. Margaret, surely you are not falling for this. Camille is dating a public school history teacher named Julian. He grades term papers at a kitchen island. He drives a sensible Honda. This is some kind of elaborate, vindictive prank she pulled together just to embarrass me. It is a scam. It has to be. Margaret did not smile. She looked down at Vivian with a mixture of disdain and absolute devastating certainty. As the undisputed queen of Atlanta's old money society, Margaret was not a woman who fell for pranks. Vivian, my husband sits on the board of 3 global banks. Margaret said, her tone carrying effortlessly across the quiet dining room of the Piedmont Country Club. Do you honestly believe we do not verify our invitations when they arrive via armed courier? Charles placed a call to Lawrence Sterling's private family office 20 minutes ago. The invitation is entirely authentic. Julian Sterling has been teaching under the radar for years to avoid social climbers and gold diggers. Your daughter is not marrying a public school teacher. She is marrying the sole heir to a $4 billion empire. The words hit Vivian like physical blows, knocking the breath from her lungs. $4 billion. Before Vivian could formulate a response, Eleanor Hayes, another prominent member of the club whose approval Vivian had desperately sought for a decade, walked swiftly over to their table. She was clutching her phone to her chest, her face flushed with uncharacteristic excitement. Margaret, did you get the velvet box? Eleanor asked, completely ignoring Vivian's presence. My husband just had ours delivered directly to his law firm. He is canceling our entire calendar for that weekend. We simply have to be in the Mediterranean. She finally glanced down at Vivian, offering a tight, obligatory smile that held absolutely zero genuine warmth. Vivian, dear, I am so incredibly sorry. We will not be able to make Jada's little gathering in the Hamptons. Please send her our regrets. Vivian sat paralyzed in her chair. The domino effect had officially begun. Within 10 minutes, 2 more women approached the table, both delivering identical faux sympathetic apologies. They were pulling out of Jada's vow renewal. They had received the golden plates. They were choosing Camille. The very women Vivian had spent decades kissing up to the high society matriarchs she had built her entire identity around were discarding her family's event without a second thought. Vivian's grand social masterpiece was crumbling in front of everyone. Unable to endure the suffocating humiliation a second longer, Vivian grabbed her designer purse and practically fled the dining room. She burst through the heavy mahogany doors of the club and rushed to her car, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement. She slammed the door shut, her chest heaving as she pulled out her phone. Her screen was an absolute war zone of notifications. The family group chat, which had been so loud with relatives groveling for Hampton's invites, was dead silent. But her news alerts were going off simultaneously. The secret was out. The media had caught wind of the wedding of the century. Vivian clicked on a top financial news notification. The headline read, "Sterling heir steps out of the shadows." Julian Sterling to wed, brilliant financial risk analyst Camille Adams in exclusive Mediterranean ceremony. Vivian scrolled through the article with shaking fingers. There were no mentions of her. There were no mentions of Jada or Preston or the Adams family legacy she was so obsessed with upholding. The piece focused entirely on Julian's strategic return to the Sterling holding empire and Camille's immaculate track record in corporate auditing. The article painted Camille as a powerhouse, a brilliant self-made professional who was the perfect strategic and romantic match for the billionaire heir. It detailed the logistics of the upcoming wedding, chartered G65O jets, a private peninsula fortified by international security, and a guest list featuring the most influential politicians and CEOs in the world. Camille had not just married into wealth. She had stepped into a stratosphere of power that rendered Vivian's country club status entirely irrelevant. Suddenly, her phone screen shifted to an incoming call. It was Jada. Vivian answered, barely putting the phone to her ear before the screaming began. "What is happening?" Jada shrieked, her voice completely hysterical. Cracking with a raw, unfiltered panic Vivian had never heard from her golden child before. "Mother, tell me what is going on. Preston is literally tearing his office apart. I can hear him throwing things." "Jada, calm down," Vivian demanded, trying to keep her own rising panic at bay. "I am trying to figure out—" "I cannot calm down!" Jada screamed over her, the sound of breaking glass echoing through the phone line. "Preston's investors are gone, all of them, the CEO of Horizon Tech, the state senators, the real estate developers, every single VIP guest just officially withdrew their RSVP for our vow renewal. Preston's secretary is fielding cancellation calls every 2 minutes. They all received solid gold invitations to Camille's wedding." Vivian gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning bone white. "We still have family coming. Aunt Denise, Marcus, your cousins." "I do not care about Aunt Denise," Jada wailed, the reality of her total social and financial ruin crashing down on her. "Aunt Denise does not have $40 million to save Preston's firm. We rented a massive historical estate in the Hamptons. We ordered a 30-foot champagne tower. We paid for custom floral installations imported from Holland. And there is going to be no one there to see it. It is just going to be us and your broke cousins standing in an empty VIP tent." Jada was hyperventilating now, her gaslighting and arrogance entirely stripped away. "Preston is blaming me. He is screaming that my sister orchestrated this to destroy his network. He says his firm is going to completely default because his key backers are flying to the Mediterranean to rub elbows with Lawrence Sterling instead of funding his portfolio. You told me Camille was a nobody, Mother. You told me she was marrying a broke teacher and that she was meant to be in the background. You ruined my life." The line went dead. Jada had hung up. Vivian sat in the driver's seat, the silence of the car pressing in on her. Her golden child was unraveling. Preston, the man she had championed as the absolute pinnacle of success, was being financially gutted by the very family Camille was marrying into. Everything Vivian had engineered to elevate her own status, every cruel jab and calculated exclusion had backfired with a lethal, terrifying precision. Vivian hurled her phone into the passenger seat. Her fear instantly morphed into a blinding, desperate rage. She needed someone to blame. She needed to regain control. She needed to confront Camille, to demand an explanation, to force her daughter to call off this aggressive societal execution. She was the mother. She still had authority. Camille owed her respect. Vivian started the engine, her tires screeching against the asphalt as she sped out of the country club parking lot. She drove recklessly, weaving through the heavy Atlanta traffic, breaking speed limits and ignoring stoplights as she headed straight for Camille's modest apartment complex. She rehearsed her demands in her head. She would threaten her. She would remind Camille of her duty to the family. She would make her fix this. She pulled up to the building, threw the car in park, and stormed up the concrete stairs. Her heart pounded furiously against her ribs as she reached Camille's door on the second floor. Camille! Vivian shouted, pounding her fist violently against the wood. Open this door right now! You do not get to do this to your sister! Open the door! There was no answer. Vivian pounded harder, the sheer force of her anger taking over. I know you are in there. You are going to fix this mess, do you hear me? You are going to call these people and fix this. Furious Vivian stepped back and kicked the heavy door right near the handle. The wood splintered slightly, and to her surprise, the door groaned and swung inward. The lock had not even been engaged. Vivian pushed the door wide open, marching inside, preparing to unleash a torrent of demands and guilt trips upon her daughter. She stepped over the threshold, her mouth open, ready to scream. But the words died in her throat. She stood frozen in the entryway. The apartment was completely devastatingly empty. The modest furniture was gone. The artwork had been taken down from the walls. The bookshelves were stripped bare. The only thing left in the living room was a faint rectangular imprint on the carpet where the sofa used to sit. The air felt hollow, echoing with a chilling absolute finality. Camille was gone. She had vanished without a trace, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Vivian stood alone in the empty, silent apartment, staring at the bare walls, finally realizing that the daughter she had treated like a disposable afterthought was now utterly, permanently untouchable. The silence in the empty apartment was deafening. Vivian stood perfectly still in the center of the living room, her expensive leather handbag slipping from her grasp and hitting the bare floorboards with a dull thud. She stared at the rectangular indentations in the carpet where Camille's modest sofa had rested just a few days prior. She walked numbly toward the bedroom, pushing the door open. The closet was entirely stripped, devoid of even a stray wire hanger. The bathroom counters were wiped spotless. This was not a hasty, emotional retreat. This was a meticulously calculated extraction. Camille had not just walked out of the family, she had surgically removed herself from their reach. Vivian's shock rapidly transmuted into a blinding white-hot fury. Her chest heaved as she pulled her phone from her pocket, her manicured fingers trembling so violently she almost dropped the device. She dialed Camille's number, pressing the phone to her ear with enough force to bruise her cheek. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Vivian ground her teeth together, pacing the length of the empty living room, her mind racing with a million different accusations and demands. She was Vivian Adams. People did not simply vanish from her life without her permission. Miles away, high above the chaotic, sprawling traffic of the Atlanta skyline, Camille stood on the sweeping glass balcony of her new $6 million penthouse. The morning air was crisp and clear. She held a steaming mug of black coffee in both hands, watching the sunlight catch the sharp angles of the downtown skyscrapers. The penthouse, a sterling real estate crown jewel, occupied the entire top floor of the city's most secure, exclusive high-rise. It featured panoramic views, imported Italian marble, and an atmosphere of absolute, untouchable peace. Julian stepped out onto the balcony behind her. He draped a heavy woven cashmere blanket over her shoulders, his presence solid and grounding. He did not say a word, simply pressing a soft kiss to the crown of her head, before standing quietly by her side. On the sleek glass patio table, Camille's phone began to vibrate. The screen illuminated, displaying the name Mother. Camille looked down at the glowing device. A month ago, that single notification would have sent a spike of anxiety straight through her chest. It would have triggered a frantic mental review of what she might have done wrong, what arbitrary social rule she had broken, or what unreasonable demand she was about to be hit with. Today, her resting heart rate did not alter by a single beat. She reached out, picked up the phone, and slid her finger across the screen to accept the call. She pressed it to her ear, taking a slow, appreciative sip of her coffee. "You made us look like absolute fools." Vivian's voice exploded through the speaker so loud and shrill that Camille had to pull the phone a few inches away from her ear. "You hid this to humiliate us. You set a trap for your own family. Where are you? Tell me where you are right now." Camille leaned back against the glass railing of the balcony. She looked at Julian, who offered a small, reassuring smile. "I am exactly where I belong, Mother," Camille replied, her voice maintaining a perfectly level clinical detachment. She sounded like an executive terminating a remarkably poor investment. She did not raise her voice. She did not match Vivian's frantic, ragged energy. "Do not use that tone with me," Vivian screamed, the sound of her pacing echoing slightly in the empty apartment. "You knew exactly who he was. You let us treat him like a nobody. You sat at my dining room table and let Preston offer him tutoring money while you knew he was the heir to a $4 billion empire. You orchestrated this entire spectacle just to embarrass your sister and destroy Preston's career. You are a vindictive, deceitful liability." "I did not hide a single thing from you," Camille said, her words slicing cleanly through Vivian's hysteria. Julian introduced himself as a high school history teacher because that is exactly what he does. He is passionate about education. He chose a life of public service. The fact that his family happens to own a global holding company was never a secret. It simply was not the most important thing about him. "You lied by omission." Vivian gasped, her breathing growing ragged. "You should have told us if we had known who he was. We would have treated him properly. We would have welcomed him." "And that right there is exactly why you were never told," Camille countered smoothly. "You just admitted it, Mother. You would only have treated him with basic human decency if you knew he could benefit your social climbing. You were so utterly blinded by your desperate need for country club validation that you refused to see what was right in front of you." Vivian stammered, sputtering half-formed syllables, but Camille refused to yield the floor. She had spent 35 years remaining silent. She was going to speak her entire truth. "You worshipped Preston because he fit your rigid, superficial aesthetic." Camille continued, her voice hardening with absolute conviction. "Preston is a white man in a fleece vest who loudly drops venture capital buzzwords and drives a leased luxury car. To you, that was the ultimate prize. You looked at Julian, a strong, brilliant, dark-skinned black man who wore denim jackets and possessed genuine humility, and your deeply ingrained toxic prejudice immediately wrote him off. Your colorism and your classism convinced you he was beneath you. You looked right at a billionaire and treated him like dirt because he did not fit your pathetic, narrow-minded parameters of success." "That is a lie," Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with the desperate panic of a narcissist finally being held accountable. "I wanted what was best for this family. I was protecting our brand. And now Preston's firm is collapsing because your new family is maliciously calling in his debts. You have to stop them, Camille. You have to tell Lawrence Sterling to back off. We are going to lose everything." Sterling Holdings is a global enterprise, Mother. They acquire defaulting debt as a standard business practice. Preston took out a $40 million loan he could not afford to repay because he was too busy funding a fake lifestyle to actually manage his investments. He built a house of cards. The wind simply blew. Camille took another sip of her coffee, watching a hawk circle high above the city buildings. "If you had bothered to ask Julian one genuine question about his life, if you had treated him with an ounce of the respect he deserved, you might have known who he was. But you chose to mock him. You chose to use my wedding invitation as a coaster. You chose to ban my family from attending my ceremony. You set your own trap, Mother. I simply let you walk into it. You listen to me right now." Vivian snarled, her tone turning venomous, shifting from frantic panic to sheer malice. "You will not abandon your sister. You will fix Preston's loan, and you will ensure we are on the guest list for this Mediterranean wedding. If you do not, I will go to the press. I will tell them exactly what kind of ungrateful, manipulative daughter Lawrence Sterling is allowing into his family." Camille actually smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression. "Go ahead, call the press. Call the society bloggers. Tell them that you preferred a bankrupt fraud over a billionaire heir. Tell them you tried to extort your own daughter to buy alcohol for strangers. I am sure the country club will love that story." Suddenly, the sound of a scuffle echoed through the phone. Heavy footsteps pounded against the hardwood floor of the empty apartment. "Give me the phone!" a second voice shrieked. Jada had apparently arrived at the apartment. There was a brief, muffled struggle before Jada's shrill, tear-stained voice ripped through the speaker. She sounded completely unhinged, the polished facade of the golden child entirely shattered by her impending financial ruin. "You are nothing but a gold digger!" Jada screamed into the microphone, her voice vibrating with pure, venomous hatred. "You planned this from the start. You let Preston humiliate himself. You stole all our VIP guests just to steal my spotlight. You are a pathetic, jealous background character who had to trick a rich man into marrying you. You are dead to us, Camille. Dead. Camille stood on the balcony looking at Julian. He was watching her, his eyes full of absolute admiration and unwavering support. He did not tell her what to say. He simply held space for her to finish the battle she had been fighting her entire life. Camille let out a light, airy laugh. It was a genuine sound of pure amusement, entirely devoid of anger. It was the laugh of a woman who finally realized that the monsters under her bed were just insecure children throwing a tantrum. It was the ultimate devastating insult to people who demanded to be taken seriously. "Enjoy the Hamptons, Jada," Camille said brightly. "I hear the weather is lovely this time of year when you are standing in an empty tent." Camille pulled the phone away from her ear, cutting off Jada's incoherent screeching response. She tapped the red icon ending the call. Without a second of hesitation, she navigated to her settings, selected her mother's contact profile, and hit block. She did the exact same thing for her sister. She turned the phone off entirely, slipping it into the pocket of her silk robe. She turned around to face Julian, leaning her back against the glass railing. "Are you finished?" Julian asked softly, stepping forward and wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her into his chest. "Yes," Camille said, resting her head against his shoulder, breathing in the clean, high-altitude air. "I think I am finally ready to plan a wedding." The polished marble floor of my corporate auditing firm clicked sharply under my heels as I stepped out of the executive elevator. It was a Tuesday afternoon, precisely 1 week after the golden invitations had decimated Atlanta's social hierarchy. I was carrying a thick, leather-bound portfolio tucked under my arm, heading toward the lobby concierge to sign for a secure courier delivery. The lobby of Harrison and Vanguard Financial was an expansive, intimidating cavern of sheer glass and steel, designed specifically to project absolute corporate authority. As I approached the front desk, a loud, agitated voice echoed across the open space. "I am a senior managing partner at Apex Vanguard Capital." The voice barked, laced with an aggressive, entitled panic that I immediately recognized. "You are going to let us up to the auditing floor right now, or I will have your job before the end of the day." I stopped walking. Standing in the center of the security checkpoint, aggressively jabbing his finger at the stoic security desk supervisor, was Preston. Flanking him on either side were Vivian and Jada. They looked absolutely frantic. Preston's usually immaculate tailored suit was rumpled, the knot of his tie pulled loose. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. Jada was clutching her designer handbag against her chest, like a protective shield, her eyes darting nervously around the intimidating corporate environment. Vivian was attempting to maintain her country club posture, but the tight, strained lines around her mouth betrayed her sheer desperation. Preston's firm was in a financial death spiral. The $40 million loan he had defaulted on was actively being processed for collection by Sterling Holdings. His entire network of investors, the very foundation of his arrogant identity, had abandoned him the moment they realized he was on the wrong side of Lawrence Sterling. Preston was a man drowning in an ocean of debt, and he had clearly realized that getting into my wedding was his singular desperate chance to network with Lawrence and save his collapsing empire. "Camille." Vivian shrieked, spotting me across the lobby. She shoved past Preston, rushing toward me with her arms outstretched, a brilliant, entirely manufactured smile plastered across her face. "Oh, darling, thank goodness we found you. We have been trying to reach you for days. Your phone must be broken." I took a deliberate step backward, keeping my hands resting calmly on the leather portfolio. "Do not touch me, Mother." Vivian froze, her arms dropping awkwardly to her sides. She glanced nervously at the surrounding corporate professionals who were beginning to watch the exchange. "Camille, please, let us just go up to your office and talk. We are family. We need to put this silly misunderstanding behind us." "It is not a misunderstanding," I replied, my voice carrying the cool, detached precision I used in boardroom negotiations. "It is a permanent severance. You are trespassing in a secure corporate facility." Preston stepped forward, physically pushing Vivian out of his way. He ran a hand through his messy hair, forcing his features into the confident, charismatic mask he used to pitch investors. "Camille, listen to me," Preston said, his voice dropping into a patronizing conspiratorial register. "Let us drop the hostility. We all said things we did not mean. Jada and I are ready to be the bigger people here and extend an olive branch. We want to make peace. We want to support your union." Jada nodded frantically beside him, offering a tight, forced smile. "We are sisters, Camille. I want to be there for you on your special day." I stared at them, absolutely fascinated by the sheer, unadulterated delusion it took to stand in front of me and demand grace after months of relentless cruelty. "You banned me from your vow renewal, so you would not be embarrassed by my budget," I reminded them, my tone completely flat. "You called me a gold digger, Jada. You kicked down the door of my empty apartment, mother." That was before we understood the full scope of the situation. Preston interrupted smoothly, waving his hand, as if erasing the past year of abuse. "We did not know Julian's background. We did not know the pressures he was under hiding his identity. But now that everything is out in the open, we can actually help you." "Help me," I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "Yes," Preston insisted, stepping closer, the desperate greed practically vibrating off his skin. "Camille, you have to be realistic. Julian is a great guy, but he is just a teacher. He grades high school papers. He does not understand high finance. He does not know how to navigate the kind of capital his family controls. He is going to be eaten alive by wealth management firms and corporate sharks." Preston adjusted his jacket, puffing out his chest, to project the phantom authority he no longer possessed. "But I manage a venture capital firm. I golf with these people. I speak their language. I can help Julian manage his trust. I can protect him from making rookie financial mistakes. I can be his primary advisor." The audacity of his demand hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Preston was standing on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy, his entire firm collapsing under the weight of his own financial incompetence, and he was offering to manage the Sterling family fortune. He believed he was vastly superior to a billionaire simply because Julian chose to teach history rather than wear a fleece vest and exploit startups. "All you have to do," Preston continued, his eyes gleaming with frantic hunger, "is give us 3 VIP passes to your wedding. Put us at the head table. Introduce me directly to Lawrence Sterling during the cocktail hour. I will handle the rest. I will secure Julian's financial future, and our family can go back to being a unified elite force. It is a win for everyone." He offered a wide, expectant smile, waiting for me to eagerly accept his generous offer of salvation. Vivian nodded eagerly beside him, her eyes practically sparkling with the fantasy of finally infiltrating the Sterling social circle. I looked at Preston. I looked at the dark, exhausted bags under his eyes, the slight tremble in his fingers, and the absolute terrifying arrogance that shielded him from reality. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply turned my head toward the security desk. "Thomas," I called out clearly. The head of building security, a massive man in a dark suit, immediately stepped forward from the desk, his hand resting on his radio. "Yes, Ms. Adams, please stand by to escort these individuals off the premises I instructed. They are not authorized visitors." Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Camille, you cannot do this. We are your family. We are offering you a way to fix everything." Preston's fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, furious scowl. "Do not be stupid, Camille. You are an auditor. You crunch numbers in a cubicle all day. You have absolutely no idea how the real financial world works. You need me in that room with Lawrence Sterling. You are making the biggest mistake of your life." I looked at him, feeling a deep, profound sense of pity for the absolute smallness of his existence. I placed the heavy, leather-bound financial portfolio I had been carrying directly onto the sleek glass lobby table between us. The thick document landed with a loud, authoritative thud that echoed through the quiet space. I rested my hands on top of the leather cover, leaning forward just slightly. "I am a senior risk analyst, Preston," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that forced him to lean in to hear me. "My firm handles the corporate risk assessments for the Southeastern Division of Sterling Holdings. Preston stopped breathing. His eyes darted down to the portfolio resting under my hands, a sudden terrifying realization dawning on his face. Lawrence Sterling did not just happen to notice your defaulted loan, I explained smoothly, maintaining unbroken eye contact with my brother-in-law. When you stood in my mother's kitchen and threatened my career when you boasted about your venture capital firm, I went back to my office and pulled your corporate filings. I ran the risk assessment myself. I compiled the data on your fraudulent funding rounds, your inflated assets, and your $40 million default. Jada let out a strangled, horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. I just audited your firm. Preston, I stated, pushing the heavy portfolio across the glass table until it rested directly against his belt buckle. Read page 4. You are completely irrevocably bankrupt. Sterling Holdings is initiating asset seizure tomorrow morning. You do not have a venture capital firm anymore. You do not have a network. You have absolutely nothing. Preston stared at this portfolio as if it were a live explosive. The blood completely vanished from his face, leaving him a chalky, sickly gray. His jaw worked silently, trying to form words that simply did not exist. I stood up straight, smoothing the front of my tailored skirt. Thomas, I said, not looking away from the shattered remnants of my family. Escort them out. If they return, have them arrested for trespassing. The warm, salt-tinged breeze off the Georgia coast whipped through the open balcony doors of the bridal suite. While the Mediterranean had been Josephine's initial instinct, Lawrence had quietly suggested the family's private, heavily fortified island, just off the shores of St. Simon's. It was a sprawling 3,000-acre sanctuary of ancient oak trees, pristine private beaches, and absolute impenetrable security. It allowed their global network to fly in without the logistical nightmares of international airspace restrictions on such short notice. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling antique mirror, watching the reflection of the woman I had become. The custom Vera Wang couture gown was a masterpiece of architectural silk and delicate vintage lace. It did not swallow me in tulle or scream for attention with excessive rhinestones. It was structured, brilliant, and undeniably powerful. It fit like a second skin, projecting the exact kind of quiet, immovable authority the Sterling family embodied. Outside the massive bay windows, the sky was a canvas of brilliant blue. The island's private airspace was a highly orchestrated symphony of arrivals. Sleek black helicopters touched down in synchronized waves on the estate's 3 designated helipads, dropping off titans of Wall Street, Silicon Valley pioneers, and international dignitaries. Down at the Deepwater Marina, massive luxury mega yachts were docking side by side, their polished hulls gleaming in the midday sun. There was no anxiety in my chest. For the first time in 35 years, I was not bracing for a passive-aggressive comment about my weight, my career, or my relationship status. I was not managing my mother's fragile ego or mitigating my sister's manufactured drama. I was simply breathing. Josephine Sterling stepped into the room wearing an immaculate emerald green gown that perfectly complemented her silver hair. She walked up behind me, meeting my eyes in the mirror. Her hands gently smoothed a microscopic wrinkle from the train of my dress. She did not offer a backhanded compliment. She did not tell me I looked good for someone who usually prioritized spreadsheets over fashion. "You are absolutely breathtaking, Camille," Josephine said, her voice rich with genuine, unconditional warmth. "Julian is a very lucky man, and we are incredibly fortunate to add your brilliant mind to this family. Are you ready?" I turned and took her hands, feeling a wave of profound gratitude. "I am more than ready, Josephine. Thank you for everything. For the island, for the dress, for stepping in when my own mother stepped out." Josephine offered a sharp, knowing smile. "A Sterling protects their own. Speaking of which, your fiercely loyal best friend has been pacing the hallway for 10 minutes. I believe she has an intelligence update she is practically vibrating to share." Josephine gracefully exited the suite, allowing Keisha to burst through the doors. Keisha looked spectacular in a deep sapphire bridesmaid gown, her hair styled in elegant sweeping waves. She held her digital tablet in one hand and a glass of sparkling cider in the other. She had an earpiece discreetly tucked into her right ear, having insisted on being linked directly to Thomas and the island's security grid to ensure absolutely nothing ruined my day. "You have to see this," Keisha announced, practically skipping across the Persian rug. She shoved the tablet into my hands. I told myself I was not going to look at their social media today, but the sheer level of absolute pathetic desperation was too good to keep to myself. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was Jada's Instagram feed. Despite the catastrophic collapse of Preston's venture capital firm and the mass exodus of their entire guest list, Jada and Preston had still traveled to the Hamptons. They had likely hoped that a few stragglers unaware of the Sterling wedding or Preston's financial ruin might still show up. They were wrong. The photograph on the screen was a masterclass in tragic denial. Jada was wearing a heavily sequined, overly elaborate white gown that looked entirely out of place for a daytime vow renewal. Preston stood beside her, his smile tight and panic-stricken, his eyes wide with the hollow look of a man who knew he was facing federal bankruptcy courts on Monday morning. They were standing in front of the 30-foot champagne tower Jada had demanded I pay for, but the camera angle was suspiciously tight, cropping out the surrounding area. Jada had applied a heavy filter trying to make the scene look vibrant and lively. "Look at the reflection in the champagne flutes," Keisha instructed, pointing a manicured fingernail at the glass tower. I zoomed in on the image. The curved glass of the champagne flutes reflected the reality Jada was desperately trying to hide. Behind the photographer, the massive, opulent VIP tent was completely undeniably empty. Rows of perfectly set tables sat abandoned. The expensive imported floral arrangements were wilting in the sun. There was no staff, no guests, no state senators, and certainly no Horizon Tech executives. It was a desolate, silent wasteland of wasted money and shattered egos. The caption beneath the photo read, "An intimate, exclusive gathering with our truest circle. Quality over quantity. Hashtag elite love. Hashtag Hamptons romance. Intimate gathering." Keisha snorted, taking a sip of her cider. "It is just the two of them, the photographer they probably paid in advance, and a catering staff that is likely packing up the Wagyu beef to take home because nobody is there to eat it. It is a financial graveyard." I stared at the image, searching my heart for even a fraction of an ounce of pity. I found absolutely nothing. This was the exact event Vivian and Jada had weaponized against me. This was the party they had deemed superior to my own wedding. They had traded their daughter and sister for a seat at a table that no longer existed. They were sitting in the ashes of their own toxic ambition, and I felt nothing but a profound, liberating sense of closure. "They made their choice," I said quietly, handing the tablet back to Keisha. "I hope the empty tent was worth it. Now, if you do not mind, I have a billionaire to marry." I turned back to the mirror, adjusting my veil, ready to leave the past behind permanently. But before I could take a single step toward the door, Keisha froze. She pressed two fingers against her discreet earpiece, her eyes widening in absolute disbelief. She held up a hand, signaling for me to wait. The silence in the bridal suite stretched for 10 long, agonizing seconds as Keisha listened intently to the rapid-fire communication coming through the secure channel. "Thomas, repeat," that Keisha said into her lapel microphone, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "Are you entirely sure? Verify the identities." She listened for another moment, her jaw dropping open. A sharp, dark laugh escaped her lips as she lowered her hand from her ear. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of sheer shock and gleeful anticipation. "What is it?" I asked, the heavy silk of my gown rustling as I turned to face her. "Is there a problem with the airspace clearance?" "No," Keisha replied, shaking her head slowly. "The airspace is perfectly clear. The problem is at the private mainland marina gate." I frowned, confused. The mainland marina was heavily guarded by Sterling security contractors. Guests had to present their solid gold invitations to board the private luxury ferries that transported them across the channel to the island. It was an impenetrable fortress. "Who is at the gate?" I asked. Keisha let out another sharp laugh. Apparently, Jada and Preston did not stay in the Hamptons to enjoy their intimate gathering. They realized exactly where every single one of their wealthy investors had gone. They realized the only way Preston could possibly salvage his dead firm and avoid total ruin was to get into this wedding and corner Lawrence Sterling in person. My blood ran cold. You are not telling me. Oh, I am telling you, Keisha interrupted, her eyes gleaming. They flew back. All three of them, Vivian, Jada, and Preston. They abandoned their empty tent, boarded a commercial flight, and drove straight to the Georgia coast. Keisha tapped her tablet, bringing up the live security feed from the mainland gate. She turned the screen toward me. There, displayed in crystal clear high definition, was the ultimate collapse of Vivian Adams. She was standing in front of a heavily armed Sterling security contractor, her face purple with rage. Her hair was windblown and frantic. Jada was beside her, still wearing her ridiculous sequined vow renewal gown, sobbing hysterically and slamming her fists against the reinforced steel of the marina gate. Preston was shoving his phone into the guard's face, screaming words I could not hear, but could easily read on his lips. He was demanding to speak to Julian. He was demanding VIP access. They do not have golden invitations, Keisha said, narrating the chaos on the screen. Thomas says Vivian is currently screaming that she is the mother of the bride and that she demands an immediate armed escort to the island. Preston is threatening to sue the entire security firm for restricting his movement. They are throwing an absolute unhinged tantrum in front of a dozen tech moguls who are currently waiting to board the ferry. The high-definition security feed displayed on the tablet was completely silent, yet the chaotic, frantic energy radiating from the screen was deafening. I stood perfectly still in my custom Vera Wang gown, watching the small, chaotic figures of my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law losing their minds at the edge of the island. A year ago, this exact scenario would have sent me into a full-blown panic attack. I would have felt the crushing, suffocating weight of my mother's disappointment. I would have rushed down to the gate, hiking up my couture dress, desperately trying to pacify her, apologizing for things that were not my fault, and bending over backward to make sure my family was comfortable. But I was no longer that woman. The scared, eager-to-please daughter had died the night my mother demanded I finance a champagne tower for a sister who actively mocked me. I looked at the screen, observing Vivian's red, contorted face as she screamed at men who protected global billionaires for a living. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. "What do you want to do?" Keisha asked, her voice dropping into a serious, protective register. "Thomas has a Marine patrol boat standing by. He can have them detained for trespassing and hauled back to the mainland in handcuffs before you even put your veil on. Just give the word." I looked away from the tablet and met my own gaze in the antique mirror. My posture was straight. My expression was perfectly serene. I refused to let their manufactured chaos infect the peace I had painstakingly built. I was not going to let them ruin my wedding day with their desperate, toxic noise. "I am not going down there," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "If I go down there, I give them exactly what they want. They want an audience. They want a negotiation. They want to drag me back into the dirt with them so they do not feel so small. They are not getting my tears, and they are certainly not getting my time." I turned to Keisha. "But I do not want them arrested just yet. Handcuffs are too easy. They need to understand the absolute finality of their choices. I want you to go down to the marina. Give them exactly what they deserve." Keisha's eyes lit up with a dangerous, predatory thrill. She smoothed down the front of her deep sapphire bridesmaid gown and offered a sharp, brilliant smile. "Consider it done. I have been waiting for this moment since Jada put her iced tea on your invitation." 10 minutes later, a sleek, customized electric golf cart silently navigated the winding, moss-draped paths of the Sterling estate, heading straight for the deep-water marina. The contrast between the island's interior and the scene unfolding at the security perimeter was staggering. Behind Keisha, the estate was a paradise of quiet, old-money elegance. A string quartet was playing soft classical music on the main lawn. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms were circulating with trays of vintage champagne. Titans of industry were laughing comfortably in the shade of ancient oak trees. At the private marina gate, it was a humid, sweaty, undignified disaster. Vivian, Jada, and Preston had apparently flown commercial into Savannah, rented a tragically basic local water taxi, and sped across the channel. They were currently trapped on a floating pontoon dock, separated from the pristine island by a massive reinforced steel gate and 4 incredibly intimidating sterling security contractors wearing tactical gear and polarized sunglasses. The Georgia heat was unforgiving. Jada was still wearing her heavy sequined white vow renewal gown. The fabric was completely inappropriate for the coastal humidity clinging to her sweating skin. Her elaborate makeup was melting down her face, and her pristine heels were scuffed from the rough wooden dock. Preston looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. His suit was drenched in sweat, his tie ripped off his eyes, darting around with the frantic, hollow terror of a cornered animal. Vivian, however, was running purely on narcissistic rage. She was gripping the steel bars of the security gate, her knuckles white, shaking them as if her sheer willpower could break through military-grade fortification. "You will open this gate right now!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking her face an ugly shade of mottled purple. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am the mother of the bride. My daughter is inside that estate. You are hired help, and I am ordering you to stand aside." The lead security contractor, a man who looked like he could stop a moving truck with his bare hands, did not even blink. "Ma'am, this is a highly restricted private island. You do not have the required security clearance or the physical invitation. You need to return to your vessel and vacate the perimeter immediately." "I do not need a piece of metal to attend my own daughter's wedding," Vivian screamed, slamming her hand against the gate. "Camille is expecting us. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Bring the estate manager down here right now." Keisha stepped out of the golf cart, the soft crunch of her heels on the gravel drawing the attention of the frantic trio. She walked toward the gate with a slow, deliberate grace, projecting the exact kind of calm, untouchable power the Sterling family embodied. She did not look angry. She did not yell. She simply observed them like a scientist studying a fascinating, somewhat pathetic display of insects. "Keisha!" Vivian gasped, her face instantly morphing into a mask of desperate relief. "Thank God! Tell these absolute apes to let us through. Camille must be a nervous wreck without me there to guide her. Tell them to open the gate." Keisha stopped 2 feet from the steel barrier. She looked at Vivian's sweating face, then at Jada's ruined sequined gown, and finally at Preston's trembling hands. She let the silence stretch, allowing the humiliating reality of their situation to fully settle over them. They were begging outside a fence, completely locked out of the world they had spent their entire lives pretending to belong to. "Camille is not a nervous wreck, Vivian," Keisha said, her voice smooth, melodic, and devastatingly calm. "She is currently sipping sparkling water in a custom couture gown surrounded by people who actually love her, value her, and respect her. She's having the greatest day of her life." Jada pushed forward, grabbing the bars next to her mother. "You cannot do this to us. We flew all the way down here. Our event was ruined. Everyone canceled on us. You have to let us in, Keisha. I am her sister." "You stopped being her sister the moment you decided her existence was an inconvenience to your social climbing," Keisha replied, her tone turning to ice. Keisha reached into her small designer clutch and pulled out a high-definition iPad. She tapped the screen, bringing up a secure multi-camera live feed of the wedding preparations currently happening on the estate grounds. She held the screen up to the steel bars. "Look at the screen, Jada," Keisha instructed softly. Jada and Vivian pressed their faces close to the gate, their eyes locking onto the bright display. The drone footage panned over the breathtaking scene. They saw the fleet of mega yachts docked in the pristine harbor. They saw the mayor of Atlanta laughing with a prominent tech billionaire. They saw the Michelin-starred chef overseeing a mountain of fresh imported seafood. They saw a level of wealth, exclusivity, and absolute power that rendered their Little Hamptons country club fantasies utterly irrelevant. "Camille wanted you to see exactly what you threw away for a coaster," Keisha said, delivering the words with surgical precision. She watched the color completely drain from Vivian's face as the gravity of the statement struck her. Every insult, every exclusion, every time they had chosen Preston's fake wealth over Camille's loyalty had led them to this exact moment, standing on a floating dock, locked out of a billionaire dynasty. "Now," Keisha added, her voice dropping into a hard final command, "step back before you are detained." Vivian staggered backward, as if she had been physically struck, her hands covering her mouth, a low sob of absolute defeat escaping her throat. Jada sank to her knees on the wooden dock, the heavy sequins of her dress pooling around her in the humid air completely broken by the visual confirmation of her total social annihilation. But Preston was not looking at the iPad. He did not care about the flowers, the jets, or the politicians. He was entirely consumed by the $40 million guillotine hanging over his neck. "I don't care about the damn coaster!" Preston suddenly roared, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. The last remnants of his polished venture capitalist persona vanished entirely. He shoved Jada out of his way, practically throwing himself against the steel gate. Sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes. "Listen to me!" Preston screamed, his fingers gripping the metal bars so tightly his knuckles bruised. "I need to speak to Lawrence Sterling. You have to let me talk to him. He owns my debt. His holding company is seizing my assets on Monday. My investors are gone. My firm is dead." He looked wildly at Keisha, spit flying from his lips. "Tell Julian I can help him. Tell Lawrence I can negotiate. If I do not get inside that estate and fix this right now, I am going to lose absolutely everything." Desperation overriding his basic survival instincts, Preston tried to physically shove his arm through the bars to reach the electronic locking mechanism. It was a monumental mistake. The lead security guard moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Preston's wrist and twisting it backward, pinning the frantic man aggressively against the cold steel of the gate. Preston let out a sharp cry of pain, but he did not stop thrashing. "Let me in!" Preston howled, struggling violently against the guard's immovable grip. "I am family. You cannot do this to me. I need Lawrence Sterling." The heavy, rhythmic crunch of tires rolling over gravel echoed from the estate path behind Keisha. A large, customized tactical golf cart pulled up to the security checkpoint, coming to a smooth, silent stop. The heavy, imposing silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The guards immediately straightened their posture, their hands dropping to their sides in a show of absolute respect. Keisha stepped back, lowering the iPad. Even Preston froze, his frantic struggles dying down as he stared wide-eyed through the steel bars. The door of the golf cart opened, and Lawrence Sterling stepped out. The heavy, imposing silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The guards immediately straightened their posture, their hands dropping to their sides in a show of absolute respect. Keisha stepped back, lowering the iPad. Even Preston froze, his frantic struggles dying down as he stared wide-eyed through the steel bars. The door of the golf cart opened and Lawrence Sterling stepped out. He did not rush. He did not look frantic. He moved with the slow, deliberate, terrifying grace of an apex predator who had already won the hunt. Lawrence was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the late afternoon sun. He radiated an aura of immense, untouchable authority that instantly made the sweltering Georgia heat feel freezing cold. He did not need to shout to command the space. His mere presence demanded total, unconditional submission. He walked toward the reinforced steel gate, stopping just inches away from the bars. His cold, calculating eyes swept over the pathetic trio standing on the floating pontoon dock. He looked at Jada's ruined, sweat-soaked, sequined gown. He looked at Preston's rumpled, panic-stricken face. Finally, his gaze settled on Vivian, analyzing her with the detached, freezing disgust of a man inspecting a particularly nasty stain on the pavement. Vivian, however, was completely blinded by her own desperate, toxic narcissism. She mistook his arrival for a rescue mission. She immediately tried to straighten her posture, running a trembling hand through her wind-blown hair and forcing her mouth into a bright, entirely manufactured country club smile. She pushed her way to the front of the gate, crowding the steel bars. "Lawrence! Thank goodness you are here," Vivian said, pitching her voice into a tone of false, intimate familiarity. "I am Vivian Adams. We have had the most ridiculous misunderstanding with your security staff. I am the mother of the bride. We are family now. Please just tell them to open this gate so we can get inside and celebrate our children." Lawrence did not blink. He did not smile. He simply stared at her. The look he gave Vivian was so utterly devoid of warmth, so intensely chilling, that the fake smile physically slid off her face. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of absolute, undeniable superiority. It was the look a king gives a peasant who has forgotten their place. "You are not family." Lawrence stated, his voice a low, smooth baritone that echoed over the quiet splashing of the marina waves. You are a biological technicality that my daughter-in-law has thankfully severed. You are a liability. Do not ever speak to me with such familiarity again. Vivian physically recoiled as if she had been slapped across the face. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide with shock and profound public humiliation. She opened her mouth to argue to defend her social standing, but the sheer crushing weight of Lawrence's stare silenced her completely. She shrank back, bumping into Jada, completely neutralized by a single sentence. Lawrence dismissed her entirely, turning his attention to the sweating, trembling man pinned against the gate. Preston saw his opening. He desperately tried to pull himself together, forcing his shoulders back, attempting to summon the arrogant venture capitalist persona he used to intimidate junior analysts. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and leaned toward the bars. "Mr. Sterling, sir!" Preston stammered, his voice shaking with a pathetic, eager desperation. "Thank you for coming down here. Listen, I know there is bad blood, but we are both businessmen. We operate in the same world. I run Apex Vanguard Capital. I manage high-level portfolios. I know Julian is stepping into a massive financial transition, and I can help him. I can guide him. I can manage his trust and protect him from the sharks. Just let me in, and I can prove my value to your family." Lawrence tilted his head slightly, observing Preston with a look of mild, morbid fascination. He let Preston hang in the silence, allowing the younger man's desperate, arrogant words to echo in the humid air. He let Preston believe for one fraction of a second that his pitch was working. Then Lawrence let out a soft, dark chuckle. It was a sound completely devoid of humor. "You operate in the same world as me?" Lawrence asked, his tone dangerously soft. Preston nodded frantically, a bead of sweat dripping off his nose. "Yes, sir. I understand high finance. I can be an asset to your holding company." Lawrence stepped closer to the gate. The security guard immediately released Preston, stepping back to give the billionaire uninterrupted access to his prey. Preston rubbed his bruised wrist, leaning forward eagerly, completely unaware that he was walking directly into a slaughterhouse. "You do not operate in my world, Preston," Lawrence said, not raising his voice a single decibel. "You lease luxury cars you cannot afford. You leverage fake capital to impress country club socialites. You build houses of cards and call it a venture capital firm. You are a fraud. And worse than being a fraud, you are incredibly, dangerously stupid." Preston's eager smile faltered. The color began to drain rapidly from his cheeks. "Sir, I can explain the leverage on my firm." "I do not need you to explain anything," Lawrence interrupted, his voice slicing through Preston's panic with lethal precision. "My firm audits global markets. We track sovereign debt. A $40 million default from a mid-level fraudster in Atlanta barely registers on my radar. Normally, I would let a bottom-feeding collection agency pick your bones clean." Lawrence gripped the steel bars of the gate, bringing his face mere inches from Preston's terrified eyes. "But you made a monumental mistake," Lawrence continued, his voice dropping into a freezing, deadly whisper. "You mocked my son. You disrespected my daughter-in-law. So yesterday, my holding company bought your toxic debt." Preston stopped breathing. His hands began to shake violently. He stared at the billionaire, his mind desperately trying to reject the terrifying reality of those words. If Sterling Holdings bought the debt, it meant Lawrence was not just an angry father-in-law. It meant Lawrence was his direct creditor. It meant Lawrence held his entire life in the palm of his hand. You bought the loan," Preston whispered, his voice cracking with absolute terror. Lawrence's expression was carved from solid granite. "We did not just buy the loan, Preston. We accelerated the default clauses. We initiated total asset seizure. As of this morning, Apex Vanguard Capital no longer exists. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your personal accounts are frozen. The lease on your luxury vehicle has been terminated. The deed to your home is currently being transferred to our asset management division." Jada let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She grabbed Preston's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. "Preston, Tell him he is lying. Tell him you fixed it. We cannot lose the house. Preston could not speak. He could not move. He was completely paralyzed by the catastrophic total annihilation of his entire existence. He had spent his life belittling a man he thought was a nobody, only to discover that the nobody's father was the architect of his total destruction. Lawrence leaned in close, his cold eyes locking onto Preston's shattered gaze, delivering the final devastating hook. "That broke teacher you laughed at?" Lawrence asked, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable victory. "Today he owns your house, your car, and your firm. Have a safe drive home." Lawrence stepped back from the gate. He did not look at Vivian sobbing against the railing. He did not look at Jada hyperventilating in her ruined, sequined gown. He simply turned around, his posture immaculate, and walked back to the waiting golf cart. Keisha offered a sharp, victorious smirk to the sobbing family before climbing into the back seat. The electric cart sped away, disappearing down the pristine, oak-lined path, leaving the gatecrashers alone on the sweltering floating dock. Preston fell to his knees on the rough wooden planks, his head in his hands completely broken. Vivian stood frozen, staring blankly through the steel bars at the paradise she would never be allowed to enter. Suddenly, a massive, deafening boom shattered the quiet evening air. High above the private island, the sky erupted in a spectacular, blinding display of gold and brilliant purple fireworks. The massive explosions cascaded across the horizon, illuminating the ocean and raining glittering light over the pristine estate. The sound echoed across the water, a massive, undeniable celebration of love, loyalty, and ultimate triumph. On the private island, surrounded by true friends and unwavering support, Camille and Julian were officially married. On the mainland dock, bathed in the flashing, colorful light of a party they would never attend, the Addams family sat in the dark, left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of their own consequences. The crystal clear, impossibly blue waters of the Maldives felt like a lifetime away as the sterling corporate jet began its final descent into Atlanta. For one entire month, I had existed in a state of absolute uninterrupted paradise. Julian and I had completely unplugged from the world. We spent our days swimming outside our private overwater bungalow, dining under the stars, and simply reveling in the quiet, profound peace of belonging to one another. I had powered down my personal cell phone the exact moment we left the reception on the private island, tossing it into the bottom of my travel tote. I had refused to let a single ounce of my family's toxic energy infiltrate my honeymoon. But as the jet's landing gear engaged with a heavy mechanical thud, I knew the digital quarantine was officially over. Julian was sitting across from me in the plush leather cabin seat, casually reviewing a historical manuscript he had acquired during our layover in Paris. He looked up, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners with a warm, knowing smile as he watched me pull the sleek smartphone from my bag. "Are you prepared for the blast radius?" Julian asked, his tone laced with mild, affectionate amusement. I ran my thumb over the power button. "I am a senior risk analyst," I replied, offering him a sharp, confident smile. "Assessing catastrophic damage is what I do best." I held down the button. The screen illuminated. For 10 seconds, the device remained completely silent as it reconnected to the global cellular network. Then the floodgates opened. The phone began to vibrate violently in my hand, a continuous, unrelenting mechanical hum that lasted for 3 full minutes. The notification banners rained down the screen in a blinding cascade of text messages, news alerts, missed calls, and voicemails. It was a digital avalanche of sheer, unadulterated panic. I bypassed the text messages entirely and opened my secure email server, clicking on a summarized dossier compiled by Keisha. My best friend had graciously offered to monitor the fallout while I was away, acting as a highly efficient filter for the family drama. The subject line of her email simply read, "The House of Cards has officially burned." I opened the attached financial press clippings first. Lawrence Sterling had not been making an idle threat on the marina dock. The execution of Apex Vanguard Capital had been public, swift, and completely merciless. Preston's firm had not just gone bankrupt, it had been spectacularly liquidated on the front pages of every major financial blog and business journal in the Southeast. The headlines were brutal. They detailed how a supposedly elite venture capital firm had been entirely built on fraudulent leverage and toxic debt. When Sterling Holdings accelerated the default clauses, the illusion instantly vaporized. Preston's leased luxury vehicles were repossessed from his driveway in broad daylight. The sleek glass-walled office space he had rented to impress gullible investors was cleared out by corporate liquidators. His entire network of country club executives and angel investors completely blacklisted him, treating his name like a highly contagious disease. He went from a self-proclaimed master of the universe to an absolute pariah in less than 48 hours. I swiped to the next file in Keisha's dossier. It was a collection of screenshots from Jada's social media accounts. The elite untouchable romance Jada had constantly shoved in my face had completely disintegrated the exact second the money ran out. They were currently engaged in a vicious, highly publicized divorce that was playing out across Instagram and local gossip forums. Without the designer bags, the Hamptons rentals, and the VIP champagne towers to hold them together, their marriage had immediately turned into a toxic war zone. Jada had attempted to play the victim, posting tearful videos, claiming she had been deceived by Preston's financial lies. She tried to garner sympathy from her followers, positioning herself as a tragic, betrayed wife who was forced to leave her home with nothing but a few suitcases of clothes. The internet, however, has a flawless memory. Her comment sections were absolutely flooded with people mocking her. They reposted the photos of her pathetic empty vow renewal tent. They ruthlessly ridiculed the fact that she had alienated her billionaire sister to support a man who was essentially running a glorified Ponzi scheme. The society bloggers she used to grovel to were now writing scathing articles about her spectacular fall from grace. She and Preston were currently fighting in mediation over leased living room furniture and maxed-out credit cards. I took a slow sip of the sparkling water the flight attendant had just placed on my tray table. The schadenfreude was rich, but the true masterpiece of karma was found in the final section of Keisha's email. Vivian Adams, the woman who had sacrificed her own daughter on the altar of high society validation, had lost the only thing she truly cared about. Her reputation was in ashes. During the spectacular gate-crashing incident at the private island, Vivian had not realized she was standing in front of dozens of incredibly powerful, highly connected individuals waiting for the ferry. One of those individuals, a prominent Atlanta socialite, had found the entire display deeply amusing and had recorded Vivian's unhinged tantrum from the upper deck of her yacht. The video had circulated through Atlanta's elite circles like wildfire. It featured Vivian red-faced and screaming like a feral animal demanding entry to a wedding she had actively tried to sabotage, while Lawrence Sterling coolly and publicly dismantled her entire existence. The social execution was absolute. The board of directors at her exclusive country club held an emergency meeting and quietly but firmly revoked her membership, citing conduct entirely unbecoming of their establishment. The women at her prestigious suburban church, the same women she used to gossip with while judging my career choices, abruptly stopped, returning her phone calls. She was unceremoniously removed from all three of the charity organizing committees she had spent a decade climbing. Vivian had built her entire identity on the perception of elegance and superiority. Now the very people she worshipped viewed her as a pathetic, desperate joke. She was entirely exiled. I closed the email dossier and opened my phone's voicemail interface. I had specifically routed all calls from Vivian, Jada, and Preston to a blocked folder before the wedding. The folder indicated I had 47 unheard messages. I selected the earliest voicemail left just 2 days after the wedding. "Camille, this has gone entirely too far," Vivian's voice barked through the speaker, maintaining her usual tone of demanding arrogance. "You need to speak to your father-in-law immediately. Preston has lost the firm. They are taking Jada's car. You need to call Lawrence and tell him to release the assets. We are your family, and you are allowing them to humiliate us. Call me back the second you get this." I deleted the message. I skipped forward, selecting a voicemail from 2 weeks later. The tone had drastically shifted. The commanding arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless panic. "Camille, please pick up the phone," Vivian stammered, the sound of a closing door echoing in the background. Jada is moving back into my guest room. Preston's lawyers are calling the house. The country club just sent me a termination letter via certified mail. They will not even let me into the dining room to collect my personal wine glasses. You have to fix this. You have the power to fix this. Please, Camille. I deleted that message as well. Julian watched me from across the aisle, his expression softening with quiet support. He did not tell me what to do. He simply held space for me as I navigated the wreckage of the people who had tried to break me. I scrolled down to the very last voicemail in the folder. It had been left yesterday afternoon. I pressed play. There was no polished greeting. There was no demand. There was only the sound of ragged, heavy breathing, followed by a raw, guttural sob that sounded completely foreign coming from my mother. It was the sound of a woman who had been entirely stripped of her armor, standing naked in the ruins of her own terrible choices. Camille. Vivian wept, her voice cracking so violently she could barely form the words. I have nothing left. The club is gone. My friends pretend they do not see me at the grocery store. Jada screams at me all day. I am so entirely alone. She paused, taking a shuddering, pathetic breath. I know you hate me, Vivian cried softly. I know I deserve it. But please, I am begging you. I just want to see your face. I just want one final conversation. I will not ask you for money. I will not ask you to talk to Lawrence. I just need to see my daughter. Please meet me, just once, tomorrow at noon, at the Silver Skillet Diner off Highway 85. Please, Camille, do not leave me like this. The voicemail clicked and ended, leaving a heavy silence in the cabin of the jet. The Silver Skillet. It was a greasy, faded linoleum-clad diner parked right on the edge of the interstate. It was the exact kind of cheap working-class establishment Vivian Adams had spent her entire life aggressively avoiding. The fact that she was suggesting a meeting there meant she was too socially terrified to be seen anywhere near her usual upscale neighborhoods. She was hiding. I looked at the black screen of my phone. I felt the familiar old instinct to fix her pain trying to claw its way up my throat, but the reinforced steel of my new boundaries crushed it instantly. I had spent 35 years twisting myself into knots to make her comfortable. I was no longer that girl. I looked across the aisle at Julian. The jet banked slightly, beginning its final approach toward the runway. What is the verdict? Julian asked gently. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my designer tote bag. I looked out the window at the sprawling, beautiful city below me, feeling an incredible, unbreakable sense of peace. I think I said, my voice perfectly clear and completely steady, it is time to go to a diner. The bell above the glass door of the Silver Skillet jingled a sharp, tinny note as I pushed it open. The air inside was heavy with the smell of scorched coffee, fried bacon, and stale industrial cleaner. It was the kind of roadside diner where the vinyl booths were taped together and the menus were permanently sticky. I stood in the entryway, perfectly framed against the harsh midday sun. I was wearing a flawless, understated slate gray designer suit. The cut was immaculate, the fabric a whispered promise of absolute wealth that did not need to shout to be recognized. My heels clicked softly against the scuffed linoleum as I scanned the room. I spotted her immediately in a back corner booth. If I had not known I was meeting my mother, I might have walked right past her. Vivian Adams was entirely stripped of her armor. The signature Chanel jackets, the perfectly draped silk scarves, the heavy string of authentic pearls she wielded like a weapon of social dominance, were all gone. She was wearing a faded beige cardigan over a plain cotton blouse. Her hair, usually sprayed into a rigid, immaculate helmet, hung limply around her shoulders. She looked 15 years older than she had just a month prior. I slid into the booth across from her. I did not lean forward. I did not reach out to take the trembling hand she had placed on the chipped formica tabletop. Camille, Vivian gasped, her voice thick and wet. Thank God. I did not know if you would actually come. You left a voicemail saying you had nothing left. I replied, my tone carrying the clinical detachment of a corporate auditor reviewing a closed file. I am here to verify the claim. Speak. Vivian flinched at the sheer lack of emotion in my voice. She pulled a crumpled paper napkin from the metal dispenser and dabbed at her eyes. They were completely red-rimmed. For the first time in my entire existence, my mother was crying genuine tears. "It is all gone, Camille." Vivian sobbed, her chest heaving as the reality of her total destruction spilled out. The house is in foreclosure. Preston's firm was seized. When Lawrence Sterling liquidated his assets, the fallout hit everyone connected to him. But the worst of it was Jada. Vivian stopped to catch her breath, looking around the cheap diner as if terrified someone from her former country club might witness her confessing her financial ruin. When Preston's accounts were frozen, all the checks he wrote for their Hamptons vow renewal bounced. Vivian continued, her voice dropping into a desperate whisper. The caterers, the florists, the venue deposits, the luxury rentals, everything. They threatened to press criminal fraud charges against Jada. I had to step in. I liquidated my entire retirement portfolio. I emptied the savings. I sold the jewelry your father left me. I bailed Jada out so she would not go to prison for wire fraud, and now I have absolutely nothing to live on. I watched her cry. I watched the woman who had spent 35 years actively minimizing my existence beg for sympathy. I did not feel an ounce of pity. She had bankrupted herself trying to save a fake, glittering illusion. "That sounds like a direct consequence of your own financial choices, Mother," I said smoothly. "You chose to back a venture capital fraudster because he leased a nice car and fit your aesthetic. You chose to fund a ridiculous society party to impress people who immediately abandoned you." Vivian shook her head frantically, reaching across the sticky table, her unpolished fingernails scraping against the surface. "You do not understand," Vivian pleaded, her voice rising in panic. "We are destitute. Jada and Preston are viciously fighting over the scraps of their life in divorce court. I cannot even afford the maintenance fees on my townhouse. But you can fix this. You are a Sterling now." She leaned in, her eyes shining with a sudden desperate manic hope. She was gearing up for the pitch. I could see the old manipulative gears turning in her head, trying to find the exact emotional button to press. "You have infinite resources," Camille, Vivian urged, attempting to force a warm maternal smile through her tears. "You married into a global dynasty. A few $1 million is essentially loose change to Lawrence and Julian. You could clear Preston's remaining debts. You could pay off my townhouse. You could restore our standing. It is a matter of Christian charity. It is about family loyalty. We are blood." I simply stared at her, maintaining absolute freezing silence. Vivian's fake smile faltered, but she doubled down, launching into the most spectacular display of gaslighting I had ever witnessed. "I know I was hard on you growing up," Vivian said, her voice dropping into a practiced soothing rhythm. "I know I pushed you. But you have to understand, I did it because I always knew you were special. I always knew you were the smart one. I was tough on you to make you strong enough to handle this kind of incredible success. Jada was fragile, but you had a brilliant mind. Everything I did was to prepare you for this moment. I believed in you when no one else did." The sheer breathtaking audacity of her revisionist history hung in the stagnant diner air. She was actually trying to take credit for my resilience. She was trying to claim that decades of emotional abuse, exclusion, and mockery were some kind of strategic maternal masterclass designed to secure my billionaire husband. I did not argue with her. Arguing would imply that her words carried any weight. Arguing would mean stepping back into the childhood dynamic where I desperately tried to correct her false narratives. I was entirely done defending my reality against her delusions. I reached into my pristine, structured designer handbag. The leather was cool and smooth against my fingertips. I pulled out a thick, heavy premium linen envelope. It was sealed with a single, unbranded wax stamp. I placed the envelope on the sticky table and slowly slid it across the surface until it rested directly in front of Vivian's folded hands. Vivian stopped talking instantly, her eyes locked onto the thick envelope. The desperate, weeping mother act vanished entirely, replaced by a sudden, intense flash of pure greed. She looked at the envelope as if it were a life raft thrown to a drowning woman. She truly believed her gaslighting had worked. She believed that the quiet, compliant, eager to please Camille had finally returned to bail her out of the catastrophic mess she had created. Vivian's hands trembled violently as she reached for the envelope. She tore into the heavy linen paper, her fingers fumbling with the wax seal in her haste. She expected a corporate bailout. She expected a multi-million-dollar wire transfer confirmation. She expected the Sterling family to silently cover the devastating costs of her profound arrogance. She pulled a single crisp certified bank check from the envelope. Vivian stared at the slip of paper, the color completely drained from her face. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from the printed numbers on the checkup to my face, absolutely paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated shock. This, Vivian stammered, her voice barely a whisper, choking on the absolute finality of the document in her hands. This is a mistake. Camille, this cannot be right. It is not a mistake, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. Vivian stared down at the certified check in her trembling hands. It was not for $10 million. It was not for $1 million. It was a check for exactly $15,000. That is the exact amount you demanded I hand over for Jada's champagne tower, I said coldly, letting the words slice cleanly through the stale diner air. That is the exact amount you tried to extort from me to fund a party designed specifically to exclude and humiliate me. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a single hand, silencing her completely. You asked for Christian charity. I continued, my voice carrying the absolute, unshakable authority of a woman who had fully reclaimed her power. This is my charity. It will keep your electricity on for a few months while you pack up your townhouse and figure out how to live in the reality you created. But make no mistake, Mother, this is not a bailout, it is a severance package. It is buying my permanent, uninterrupted peace. Vivian stared at me, the $15,000 check shaking in her grip. The crushing realization finally hit her. There was no negotiation. There was no argument left to make. The endless well of my forgiveness had completely dried up. Do not ever contact me or my husband again, I stated. If you attempt to reach out, if you attempt to circumvent security at my home or my office, my legal team will file an immediate restraining order for harassment. I did not wait for her to respond. I did not wait for the inevitable tears or the screaming accusations of ingratitude. I simply stood up, smoothed the front of my designer suit, and picked up my handbag. I turned my back on the booth and walked toward the diner exit. The bell above the door chimed a bright, cheerful note as I stepped out into the blazing Georgia sunshine. I did not look back through the greasy glass windows. I did not need to see her sitting alone in the ruins of her life. Idling in the cracked asphalt parking lot of the diner was a sleek midnight black Maybach. The heavy armored passenger door swung open as I approached. Julian was waiting inside. He was dressed in a casual, tailored linen shirt, looking perfectly relaxed and completely at home in the elevated luxury. He reached out his strong, warm hand, wrapping securely around mine as I slid into the plush, climate-controlled leather seat. The door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off the noise of the highway and sealing us in total quiet. Is it done? Julian asked softly, his thumb gently tracing the back of my hand. It is completely done, I replied, resting my head against the back of the seat and letting out a long, cleansing breath. The driver pulled smoothly out of the diner parking lot, merging onto the highway and leaving the silver skillet far behind us. I looked out the tinted window as the suburban sprawl faded into the distance. I reflected on the agonizing, brilliant journey of the past year. I had not just married into a global dynasty. I had learned how to wield my own strength. I had protected my own brilliance, maintained my absolute peace, and simply stepped aside to let the trash take itself out. They thought my silence was weakness, but while they were fighting for a seat at a table of illusions, I ended up owning the entire building. My name is Camille Sterling, and my life is just beginning. True security and value come from within, not from the conditional approval of toxic family members. When you stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that disrespect you and instead build your own independence, you truly reclaim your power. Setting firm boundaries is not cruel. It is a necessary act of survival. Ultimately, the best revenge is simply letting go, protecting your peace, and allowing those who mistreat you to face the natural consequences of their own terrible actions. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story and subscribe for more.